Hi, welcome to this week's Word on Wednesday. The sun is shining outside, so we're going to go into Hanoi city centre, and I'm going to take you to one or two special occasions for a very special reason. Queen Elizabeth celebrated her 94th birthday in the UK last week. She's reigned for 65 years. Not as much as King Bhumibol of Thailand, who's reigned for 70 years before he died, but both of them have got a bit to go before they reach the 72-year reign of King Louis XIV of France. I am outside the Museum of Ho Chi Minh in Hanoi. Ho Chi Minh, he was the president of Vietnam for 24 years. Now people think Ho Chi Minh, if you're outside Hanoi, you're outside Vietnam, you might think, who was this guy? Some rebel from the north? Well, actually, Ho Chi Minh spoke 7 languages. He wrote 5 books of poetry in Russian, Chinese, French and Vietnamese, to say the least. And he instituted a children's virtues program that is still alive today. Ho Chi Minh was no mean guy. In fact, if Ho Chi Minh hadn't been raised up, then really, Vietnam might be part of America. Behind me is Ho Chi Minh's mausoleum. The thing about great leaders like Queen Elizabeth, Louis XIV, is that sometime they're all going to die. And behind me are the remains of Ho Chi Minh for the visitors to come and look. You see, the Bible says God raises up and brings to nothing kings and queens. Romans 13, 1-17 says this: "Let every person be subject to the rulers and authorities, because there's no rulers and authorities that are there unless they are ordained by God himself." God raises up kings and queens and rulers, and we have a part to play in that, because the Bible says we are to pray for them. It doesn't matter if you agree with their policies, it doesn't matter if you're the same political party or not, your duty is to pray for them. Back in Wales, I was part of an interchurch team that prayed for local councillors, MPs, MSPs, and it didn't matter. Those in leadership were prayed for every week by a group, including a fellow pastor. So what happens when we disagree? Well, Eric Liddell, the great British runner, he was called to run on a Sunday in the Paris Olympic Games. And when he found out about this, he said, "I can't do it, it's the Lord's Day. I cannot run on a Sunday." In the film Chariots of Fire, he was called to an audience with the king. And the king said to him, "Look, Liddell, this is the way it is. King and country first, God second." And Eric Liddell said, "God raises up kings and queens and brings them to nothing." So how do we respond when things go wrong? Well, unlike what's happening in the United States and in England at the moment, we don't riot. We don't run rampage. There's nothing godly or nothing holy about looting, setting fire to buildings, to running mock. That is not of God. That's not the way to protest. Going back many years ago, Mahatma Gandhi in India, he was aware that the British were putting the grip on India. They had told the Indian people they were not allowed to buy salt, they couldn't make salt, they couldn't go to the beach to collect salt, and salt was a staple diet at that time. And yet the English banned it, and when they did get some salt, they taxed it so heavily that it was almost impossible for the Indian people to make meals. And so Mahatma Gandhi wrote to the Viceroy in India, Lord Irwin, and he says, "I am going to march 240 miles to the shore, and I'm going to collect some salt and I'm going to take it back and use it." He started off with a few men behind him. As he gathered his pace, as he gathered momentum, tens of thousands joined him on this walk to the shore. When he got there, English soldiers were putting the salt in the dirt so the Indian people couldn't even pick it out. But Mahatma Gandhi leaned forward and he lifted out a pile of filthy, dirty salt, and the protest had started. Not long after that, he was called to London. And a few years later, India became a sovereign country. You don't have to riot and run and loot and steal and burn and harm to protest. All rulers are subject to the authority of God. He raises them up and he brings them down. Our duty is to pray for them. Let me ask you, are you praying for people like President Trump? Are you praying for Boris Johnson? Are you praying for the police force in America? Are you praying for the Black Lives Matter? Are you praying for all the other groups that matter, not just the black lives? I'm going to finish with an observation that happened back in the 80s during the coal miners' strike in Yorkshire. There was 5,000 policemen at a pit head and 5,000 miners striking at the other side. There was a pitched battle going on. There was bricks and bottles getting thrown at each other. They were all protesting at the pit closures. And away in the corner, there was a small group huddled together, arms round each other. I looked closely as I walked past and I found that this group was made up of policemen and miners. And what they were doing is they were praying for each other, and they were praying for the government, and they were praying for this situation. What's happening in America at the moment? What's happening in the UK at the moment is not of God. These protests are not peaceful. These protests are wrong. What happened to George Floyd was wrong, but the reaction is just as bad. You know, I saw in the news this morning in Seattle, they have created a police-free zone, and people are walking out with balloons and prams and eating ice creams and saying, "This is wonderful, we've got rid of the police, we can live in harmony." What happens when the pimps move in? What happens when the gangsters move in? What happens when the violent move in? The first people they're going to call for are the police. The answer is not to remove authority. The answer is to pray for authority, because all authority, kings and queens, are ordained by God. Our responsibility is to pray for them, not to get sucked into politics. The Pharisees came to Jesus one day and they tried to trap him. They said, "Teacher, we know that you're a man from God because of all these wonderful works that you do, but do you think that your followers should pay tax to the temple?" Jesus says, "Give me a coin." And they tossed him a coin. He looked at it. He says, "Whose inscription is on this coin?" And the Pharisee said, "Well, Caesar's, of course." And Jesus says, "Well, give to Caesar what is his, and give to God what is his." God ordains kings and queens. Politics are not for getting sucked in for, but people are for praying for. Have a good week.